Hey, what is up everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
In the frozen darkness between distant stars, where the light of hope struggles to pierce the endless void, there exists a brotherhood unlike any other. They are warriors forged in ice and tempered by savagery, yet beneath their wild exteriors beats the heart of something far more profound than mere ferocity. They call themselves the Vulca Fenrica, the Wolves of Fenris, though the wider Imperium knows them by another name. They are the Space Wolves, and their story is one of unwavering devotion, unbreakable bonds, and a loyalty so absolute that it has weathered 10,000 years of unending war without faltering. When we speak of loyalty in the grim darkness of the far future, we must understand that this concept carries weight beyond mere words. Loyalty in the 41st millennium is not simply following orders or remaining at one's post. It is a force that binds warriors together across the vast gulfs of space and time. It is the thread that connects a chapter to its Primarch, even when that Primarch has been missing for millennia. It is the fire that burns within a warrior's hearts, driving him to face horrors that would shatter lesser souls. And among all the Adeptus Astartes, among all the gene-forged sons of the Emperor, none have demonstrated this quality more consistently, more fiercely, or more authentically than the Space Wolves. Their story begins not on holy terror, nor in the gene laboratories of the Emperor's great work, but on a world of ice and fire, of endless winter and merciless survival. Fenris, they call it, a death world in every sense of the term, or where the very act of drawing breath is a victory against the elements. From this crucible of hardship emerged warriors whose loyalty is not a matter of doctrine or indoctrination, but something far deeper, something written into the very marrow of their bones and encoded within the strange genetic heritage they carry. Picture, if you will, a galaxy in flames. The Horus heresy tore the Imperium asunder, turning brother against brother and father against son. Half the Space Marine legions fell to the whispered promises of chaos, their oaths of loyalty crumbling like ash in the wind. Primarchs who had walked beside the Emperor himself turned their blades against their creator. Yet through all this darkness, through all the betrayal and bloodshed, the Space Wolves never wavered. Not for a single moment did they consider abandoning their oaths. Not once did the seductive whispers of the ruinous powers find purchase in their hearts. This is the story of that loyalty. This is the tale of warriors who have faced every conceivable temptation and threat, who have been manipulated and deceived, who have lost their Primarch and been forced to stand alone against the darkness, yet who have never, not once, in 10,000 years, betrayed the trust placed in them by the Emperor of mankind. This is the saga of the Space Wolves. To understand why the Space Wolves stand apart, why their loyalty burns brighter than the fusion reactors of a battle barge, we must first understand what makes them different from their brother chapters. The Adeptus Astartes are superhuman warriors, in each one transformed from a mortal man into a living weapon through the implantation of gene seed derived from the Primarchs themselves. But the Space Wolves carry something more within their enhanced physiology. They bear the mark of the Canis helix, a genetic legacy that sets them apart from all others and connects them to their Primarch in ways that other chapters can barely comprehend. This connection is not merely physical, though the physical changes are dramatic enough. A Space Wolf's senses are sharper than those of other Astartes, his fangs longer, his instincts more primal. But beyond these outward manifestations lies something deeper, a spiritual bond that links every son of Rus to every other, and all of them to the Wolf King himself. When a Space Wolf speaks of loyalty, he speaks of pack loyalty, and of the bonds that tie wolf to wolf in the wild places of Fenris. These are not bonds forged through duty alone, but through shared struggle, shared triumph, and shared loss. The chapters of the Adeptus Astartes are many, each with their own traditions and their own claims to honor. The Ultramarines point to their adherence to the Codex Astartes and their role in rebuilding the Imperium after the heresy. The Imperial Fists speak of their defense of Terra itself during humanity's darkest hour. The Blood Angels carry the weight of their angelic Primarch's sacrifice, but the Space Wolves make no such grand claims. They do not boast of their loyalty. They simply live it, day after day, battle after battle, century after century. And perhaps that is what makes their loyalty most remarkable of all. It is not performative. It is not calculated to earn favor or advance position. The Space Wolves are, by their own admission, difficult allies. They chafe against authority, mock the rigid structures of imperial bureaucracy, and have come into conflict with the ecclesiarchy, the Inquisition, and even other Astartes chapters on numerous occasions. They are not loyal because it is expected of them, or because they fear the consequences of betrayal. They are loyal because that is simply who they are, at the deepest level of their being. In the pages that follow, we will trace the history of this remarkable chapter from its earliest days to the present era. We will walk the frozen wastes of Fenris and stand in the shadow of the Fang, their fortress monastery that rises like a mountain of adamantium and stone. We will witness the exploits of their Primarch, as Leman Russ, whose deeds during the Great Crusade established the template that his sons would follow for all the ages to come. We will descend into the flames of Prospero and see how the Space Wolves carried out the most terrible duty imaginable, proving their loyalty even when it demanded the near destruction of a brother legion. We will witness their steadfastness during the Horus Heresy, when the galaxy burned and half the Imperium fell to darkness. We will explore the mysterious curse that haunts their gene seed and the creatures of nightmare it sometimes produces. We will meet the heroes who have led the chapter through the long millennia of the 41st Millennium, from Bjorn the Fell-Handed, the oldest living space marine in the Imperium, to Logan Grimner as the Great Wolf, whose leadership has guided his brothers through some of their darkest hours. And we will examine perhaps the most controversial moment in the chapter's history, the so-called Months of Shame, when the Space Wolves stood against the mighty Inquisition itself to protect ordinary humans from what they saw as unjust persecution. For in this single event, more than any other, we see the true nature of Space Wolf loyalty revealed. They are not merely loyal to the Emperor as an abstract concept, or to the Imperium as a political entity. They are loyal to humanity itself, to the common men and women of the Imperium, whom they were created to protect. So settle in. Let the cold winds of Fenris howl around you in your imagination, and prepare yourself for a journey through 10,000 years of warfare, sacrifice, and unbreaking devotion. This is the story of the Space Wolves, and it is a story that deserves to be told in full. The frozen hell of Fenris, a world that forges legends. Before there were Space Wolves, before there was a Primarch or a Legion, there was Fenris. And to understand the warriors who call this world home, you must first understand the world itself. Fenris is not merely a harsh environment. It is not simply a dangerous place. Fenris is, in every sense that matters, a living challenge hurled at the universe, a world that seems designed by some malevolent intelligence to destroy everything that dares to exist upon its surface. Imagine a planet caught in the grip of eternal winter, where temperatures plunge so low that exposed flesh freezes solid within moments. And picture seas that boil with volcanic fury one season and freeze into endless plains of killing ice the next. Envision mountains that pierce the heavens, their peaks wreathed in storms that never cease, their slopes prowled by predators of such ferocity that they would give pause to a Katachan jungle fighter. This is Fenris, and this is where the Space Wolves are born. The world sits in a peculiarly unstable orbit around its star, an orbit that creates seasons of extraordinary violence. During the season of fire, volcanoes erupt across the planetary surface, heating the oceans to boiling and filling the air with ash and toxic fumes. Islands that existed for generations are swallowed whole by the hungry sea, while new landmasses rise steaming from the depths. During the season of ice, the cold descends like a hammer, a flash freezing the seas and burying the land beneath glaciers that grind forward with unstoppable force. Only the brief season of calm offers any respite, and even then, Fenris remains more dangerous than most death worlds. The human inhabitants of Fenris, those who survive, are among the toughest people in the galaxy. They live as their ancestors lived for untold generations, sailing the treacherous seas in longships, fighting for survival against the elements and against each other. Their society is built around tribes, each led by a chief or king whose authority comes not from birthright, but from demonstrated strength and wisdom. They know nothing of the wider Imperium, nothing of void ships or laser weapons, or the threats that lurk in the darkness between stars. They know only the struggle to survive, and that struggle makes them hard as the ice they walk upon. But Fenris offers more than mere hardship to temper its children. The wildlife of this death world would be the stuff of nightmare for inhabitants of gentler planets. Wolves the size of horses roam in packs, their intelligence far exceeding that of normal beasts. Krakens as large as battle barges lurk in the depths of the boiling seas, capable of dragging entire longships to their doom. Trolls and giants, beasts that seem drawn from human myth, stalk the frozen wastes in search of prey. Every day on Fenris is a battle for survival, and only the strongest, the most cunning, and the most determined survive to see another dawn. This is the world that shapes the Space Wolves, and it shows in everything they are. Other chapters recruit from various sources, seeking promising genetic material wherever it can be found. The Space Wolves recruit exclusively from the warrior tribes of Fenris, taking only those who have already proven themselves in the crucible of their homeworld. By the time a potential recruit attracts the attention of the chapter's wolf priests, he has likely already killed more fearsome creatures than many Imperial soldiers will face in a lifetime. The Fang, the fortress monastery of the Space Wolves, rises from the highest peak of the Asserheim mountain range. It is the only stable landmass on Fenris, a continent of stone and ice that has endured through countless cycles of fire and cold. The structure itself is carved from the mountain, extending for kilometers beneath the surface. Its halls and chambers filled with the accumulated treasures and relics of 10,000 years of warfare. Here, the aspirants are brought after their selection, and here they begin the transformation that will make them something more than human. The relationship between the Space Wolves and their homeworld is unlike that of any other chapter. Where other Astartes view their recruiting worlds as little more than genetic reservoirs, sources of raw material for the production of new warriors, the Space Wolves maintain deep ties to the people of Fenris. They protect the tribal settlements from the worst of the planet's predators. They settle disputes between tribes when asked, their judgments accepted with reverence, and they watch, always, for the young warriors who might one day join their ranks. This connection to the common people of Fenris extends to the Space Wolves' view of humanity as a whole. They do not see themselves as distant demigods, elevated far above the concerns of ordinary mortals. They see themselves as protectors, as shields between the people of the Imperium and the horrors that would consume them. This perspective, forged in the tribal traditions of Fenris, explains much about the Space Wolves' particular brand of loyalty. They are loyal not to abstract concepts or political structures, but to people, to the warriors who fight beside them, and the civilians they are sworn to defend. The culture of Fenris permeates every aspect of the Space Wolves chapter. Where other chapters maintain the formal ranks and structures laid down in the Codex Astartes, the Space Wolves organize themselves along lines that would be familiar to any Fenrisian tribesman. Their companies are called Great Companies, each led by a wolf lord who functions much like a tribal chief. Their basic warriors are blood claws, hot-blooded young warriors still learning to temper their aggression. Their veterans are grey hunters, experienced warriors who have proven themselves in countless battles. And their eldest, most seasoned warriors are Long Fangs, whose grey hair and weathered faces speak of decades of war. Even their manner of speech and celebration reflects their Fenrisian heritage. The space wolves are famous throughout the Imperium for their love of feasting, drinking, and storytelling. When not at war, they gather in the great halls of the Fang, sharing meals of roasted meat and tankards of mead, as a liquor so potent it would kill an unaugmented human. They boast of their exploits and listen to the sagas of ancient heroes, connecting themselves to the long chain of warriors who have worn the grey armor before them. The creatures of Fenris deserve particular attention, for they are as much a part of the space wolves' identity as the warriors themselves. The Fenrisian wolves are not merely animals, but intelligent creatures of near-human cunning. Some scholars believe they may have originated from human stock, transformed over millennia by the harsh environment and the strange energies that permeate the planet. Whatever their origin, these wolves share a bond with the space wolves that transcends mere domestication. They fight alongside their Astartes brothers in battle, their fangs as deadly as any power sword, their loyalty as absolute as any oath. The seas of Fenris teem with creatures of nightmare proportion. Krakens large enough to dwarf battleships lurk in the deep waters, rising to the surface to drag entire fishing fleets to their doom. Sea serpents of impossible length wind through the currents, their coils capable of crushing the hulls of the sturdiest vessels. These are not mere hazards to be avoided, but enemies to be fought, adversaries that test the courage and skill of every Fenrisian who dares to take to the water. On land, the dangers are no less formidable. Ice trolls, creatures of primitive malevolence and terrifying strength, stalk the frozen wastes in search of prey. Giants walk the mountains, their footsteps shaking the very ground. Mastodons and mammoths larger than any tank roam in thundering herds. And to hunt them is to risk being trampled beneath hooves the size of boulders. Every creature on Fenris, from the smallest burrowing rodent to the largest predator, is a survivor in a world that offers no mercy to the weak. This is the world that created the space wolves, and this is the culture that sustains them. From the frozen hell of Fenris emerged warriors unlike any other, warriors whose loyalty is forged in the same fires that temper their bodies and spirits. When a space wolf gives his word, he gives it with the weight of generations behind him, with the memory of all the battles fought and all the sacrifices made by those who came before. And when a space wolf stands against the darkness, he stands with the strength of Fenris itself at his back. The Wolf King, Leman Russ, father of the Legion, in the age before the Imperium, but when the Emperor of Mankind still walked openly among his people and led his armies in the Great Crusade to reunite humanity, he created 20 sons. These Primarchs, as they were called, were superhuman beings, crafted from the Emperor's own genetic material, each destined to lead one of the 20 Space Marine legions. But before they could fulfill their purpose, disaster struck. The infant Primarchs were scattered across the galaxy by the malevolent powers of the warp, cast to distant worlds far from Terra and their father's guiding hand. One of these Primarchs, the genetic father of what would become the Space Wolves, fell upon Fenris. The circumstances of his arrival have been told in different ways across the millennia, but all accounts agree on certain key details. The infant Primarch did not perish in the hostile environment of this death world, as any ordinary child surely would have. Instead, he was found and raised by a she-wolf, accepted into her pack as one of her own cubs. Along with her natural offspring, 2 wolves he would name Freki and Geri. The Primarch grew to adulthood in the wilderness of Fenris, learning the ways of the wolf before he learned the ways of men. Picture, if you can, this scene from an age now lost to legend. A child of impossible potential, raised not by humans but by beasts, running with the pack through the frozen wastes, hunting alongside creatures that would have been the stuff of nightmare for ordinary men. He grew faster and stronger than any wolf, his superhuman physiology asserting itself even in these primitive conditions. Yet he was also learning something that would shape his entire legion for all the ages to come. He was learning the meaning of pack loyalty, of the bonds that tie wolf to wolf in the wild places of the world. The first encounter between Leman Russ, as he would come to be called, and human beings occurred when he and his wolf brothers raided a village for food. The local tribe, led by a king named Thengir, managed to drive off the wolves, but they captured the strange man-child who ran with them. King Thengir, recognizing something extraordinary in this feral youth, chose not to kill him, but to civilize him. Under Thengir's patient guidance, Lemon Russ learned human speech, human customs, and human warfare. He learned quickly, his Primarch intelligence absorbing knowledge at a rate that astounded his adopted people. But Russ never forgot the lessons of the wolf. Even as he mastered the weapons and tactics of the Fenrisian tribes, he retained the instincts and values of the pack. Loyalty above all, protection of the weak by the strong. The understanding that a pack survives only when every member is willing to fight and die for the others. These principles became the foundation of his character, and they would later become the foundation of the legion he would lead. As Russ grew to manhood, his legend spread across Fenris. Tales spoke of his impossible strength, of his ability to single-handedly defeat entire armies, to tear oak trees from the ground and snap them over his back, to wrestle Fenrisian mammoths to the ground with his bare hands. When King Thengir died, there was no question who would succeed him. Lemon Russ became king in his turn, and under his leadership, the people of his tribe prospered as never before. It was inevitable that tales of such a remarkable figure would eventually reach the Emperor. The master of mankind, still searching for his scattered sons, traveled to Fenris to investigate. What happened when these two legendary beings finally met has become one of the most celebrated stories in the history of the Space Wolves. The Emperor arrived at Russ's court in disguise, cloaked in psychic illusions that concealed his true nature. Rather than simply revealing himself and claiming Russ as his son, the Emperor chose to test the Primarch in a manner befitting Fenrisian custom. Russ, displaying the defiance that would characterize both him and his sons, refused to acknowledge the stranger as his lord and master. Instead, he challenged the newcomer to a series of contests. The first was a test of eating, and though the Emperor consumed enough to feed a dozen normal men, Russ ate more. The second was a test of drinking, and once again the Primarch emerged victorious, draining barrels of Fenrisian ale that would have killed lesser beings. The third and final test was single combat, and here at last the Emperor revealed his true power. With a single blow, he struck Russ unconscious. Some might have expected the Wolf King to resent his defeat, but Russ's response demonstrated the essential honor that lay beneath his wild exterior. He acknowledged the Emperor as his superior, recognized him as his father, and pledged his service without reservation. This was not mere submission to superior force, though the Emperor's power was undeniable. While it was the acceptance of a rightful leader by a warrior who understood the value of hierarchy within a pack. The Emperor had proven himself worthy of loyalty, and Lemon Russ gave that loyalty absolutely. What followed was the transformation of Russ from a tribal king into the Primarch of a Space Marine Legion. The Emperor took his son from Fenris, showing him the vast Imperium he was building and the enemies that threatened humanity's survival. Russ was introduced to the warriors of the 6th Legion, Space Marines who had been created using genetic material derived from his own DNA. These warriors were already formidable, having fought across dozens of worlds in the Great Crusade, but they had lacked direction and purpose. Under Russ's leadership, they would become something far greater. While the culture of Fenris flowed into the Legion like water filling an empty vessel, Russ remade his warriors in the image of his adopted world, teaching them the customs and values of the tribal people among whom he had been raised. He organized them into great companies, led by warrior lords. He encouraged the boasting and feasting that characterized Fenrisian society. He taught them to fight not as disciplined automatons, but as wolves hunting in a pack, using cunning and ferocity in equal measure. Most importantly, he instilled in them the same fierce loyalty that had defined his own character since his days running with the wolves. The newly christened Space Wolves quickly established a reputation that set them apart from their brother legions. They were the Emperor's executioners, as the warriors called upon when the harshest measures were required. When a planetary governor needed to be made an example of, when a threat was too dangerous to negotiate with, when a message needed to be sent in blood and fire, it was the Space Wolves who delivered it. They did not question these assignments, did not argue about the ethics of their missions. The Emperor commanded, and they obeyed. But they were not mindless killers, whatever their reputation might have suggested. Russ possessed a cunning intellect that belied his barbaric appearance, and he passed this trait on to his sons. The Space Wolves were as capable of strategy and tactical thinking as any legion. They simply chose to present a different face to the galaxy, using their savage reputation as a weapon in itself. Enemies who expected nothing but berserker charges often found themselves outmaneuvered and destroyed by warriors far more subtle than they appeared. Russ also established what would become one of the defining characteristics of the Space Wolves: their distrust of psychic powers. The Primarch had an instinctive suspicion of sorcery, a feeling that the power of the warp was inherently dangerous and corrupting. This did not mean the Space Wolves rejected psychic abilities entirely. They had their rune priests, warriors who wielded what they insisted were the natural forces of Fenris, rather than warp sorcery. But Russ drew a clear line between this acceptable practice and the overt manipulation of the Imperium practiced by some other legions, particularly the Thousand Sons, as the relationships Russ formed with his brother Primarchs were complicated. He was close to Horus, the favored son of the Emperor, and considered the War Master a friend and mentor. He developed a fierce rivalry with Lion L. Johnson of the Dark Angels, a competition that occasionally erupted into actual combat, but which contained, at its core, a measure of mutual respect. And he clashed repeatedly with Magnus the Red of the Thousand Sons, whose embrace of sorcery represented everything Russ despised. Through all of this, Russ's loyalty to the Emperor remained absolute. He was not a politician or a diplomat. He was a weapon, and he placed himself wholly in his father's hands. When the Emperor pointed at an enemy, Russ destroyed it. When the Emperor called for justice, Russ delivered it. And when the Emperor needed someone to carry out tasks too terrible for more delicate souls, Russ accepted the duty without hesitation. This was the Primarch who shaped the Space Wolves, and his influence continues to define them 10,000 years after his disappearance. The loyalty he showed to the Emperor became the loyalty the Space Wolves show to the Imperium. The bond he forged with his warriors became the bond that ties every Space Wolf to every other. And the principles he lived by, the values of the pack that he learned running with wolves across the frozen wastes of Fenris, remain the guiding lights of his chapter to this day. Russ's philosophy of warfare was as distinctive as his personality. He believed that war was not merely a means to an end, but a test of character, of a crucible that revealed the true nature of those who engaged in it. A warrior who fought with honor, even in defeat, earned his respect. A warrior who achieved victory through treachery earned only his contempt. This distinction would shape Space Wolf doctrine for all the ages to come, influencing how the chapter approached both allies and enemies. The Wolf King also understood something that many of his brothers never grasped, that the purpose of war was not glory for its own sake, but the protection of those who could not protect themselves. The Imperium existed for the sake of humanity, not the other way around. When Russ fought, he fought for the common people of the worlds he conquered, for the farmers and merchants and craftsmen who would live under imperial rule. This perspective, seemingly at odds with his savage reputation, formed the moral foundation of Space Wolf loyalty. His relationship with his own warriors was unique among the Primarchs. Where other Legion commanders maintained a certain distance from their Marines, Russ was always accessible to his sons. He feasted with them, drank with them, told stories, and listened to their tales in turn. He knew many of his warriors by name and took a personal interest in their development. This familiarity bred not contempt, but deeper loyalty, for the Space Wolves knew that their Primarch saw them not as interchangeable soldiers, but as individuals worthy of attention and respect. The 6th Legion. During the Great Crusade, executioners and protectors. The Great Crusade was humanity's golden age of expansion, a time when the newborn Imperium burst forth from terror like a storm of steel and fire, reclaiming worlds that had been lost during the long darkness of the Age of Strife. At the forefront of this monumental endeavor marched the 20 Space Marine legions, each led by a Primarch, each carving its own legend in the blood of humanity's enemies. And among these legions, the Space Wolves occupied a unique and sometimes uncomfortable position. They were the Emperor's executioners. This title was not self-proclaimed, but earned through deed after bloody deed during the early centuries of the Crusade. When diplomacy failed, an ordinary military force proved insufficient. When an enemy needed to be destroyed so thoroughly that their very name would become a warning to others, the Space Wolves were unleashed. They performed this function with brutal efficiency, never questioning the necessity of their missions. There's never doubting that the Emperor's judgment was sound. Consider for a moment what this role required of them. The Great Crusade brought the Emperor's forces into contact with countless human civilizations that had developed in isolation during the Age of Strife. Some welcomed the Imperium gladly, others resisted, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of pride, sometimes because they had fallen under the sway of powers hostile to humanity's unity. When resistance proved intractable, when examples needed to be made, the Space Wolves delivered the Emperor's final judgment. This did not make them popular among their brother legions. The Ultramarines, builders of empires and architects of order, looked upon the Space Wolves' savage methods with distaste. The Thousand Sons, seekers of knowledge and preservers of ancient lore, saw the Wolves as barbarians who destroyed what they could not understand. Even legions known for their own brutality sometimes viewed the Space Wolves with wary respect, recognizing in them a capacity for violence that served the Emperor's purposes but made them uncomfortable allies. The Space Wolves themselves seemed largely unconcerned with such opinions. They knew what they were, and they accepted the burden of their role without complaint. Leman Russ had taught them that loyalty sometimes required difficult actions, that the defense of humanity sometimes demanded blood be spilled that might otherwise have been spared. If other legions wished to maintain cleaner hands, the Wolves would handle the dirtier work. Such was their duty. But there was another side to the Space Wolves during this era, was one that often goes unmentioned in accounts of their more violent exploits. They were fierce protectors of the common people of the worlds they conquered. While other legions might view mortal humans as little more than resources to be managed, the Space Wolves remembered their origins among the tribes of Fenris. They understood that the Imperium existed for the sake of humanity, not the other way around, and they acted accordingly. Time and again during the Great Crusade, Space Wolves intervened to protect civilian populations from unnecessary harm. They argued against scorched earth tactics when other options remained viable. They ensured that surrendering enemies were treated with honor, provided they had fought with honor themselves. And when the war was won, they often stayed to help rebuild, lest their massive hands surprisingly gentle when helping to raise a fallen wall or tend a wounded child. This duality, the capacity for terrible violence alongside genuine compassion for the innocent, defined the Space Wolves throughout the Great Crusade. They were not mindless berserkers, though they could fight with berserker fury when the situation demanded it. They were not gentle peacekeepers, though they could show mercy to those who deserved it. They were wolves, predators who killed when killing was necessary, but who also cared for the pack and defended those under their protection. The relationship between the Space Wolves and the Dark Angels during this period deserves particular attention, as it would come to define both chapters for all the millennia that followed. The rivalry between Leman Russ and Lionel Johnson began, according to most accounts, during a joint campaign on the world of Doolan. The planetary governor had insulted Russ's honor.
You know, I have to be honest with you here. When I first got into 40k, I didn't really get the Space Wolves. I thought they were just wolf guys with too much fur on their armor. But the more I dove into their lore, the more I realized I had them completely wrong. What draws them to me isn't the Viking aesthetic or the wolf motifs. is that they're the most human of all Astartes. They actually care about regular people, they'll fight the Inquisition itself to protect civilians. That's rare in this universe. Most chapters see mortals as expendable, but the wolves remember where they came from. And honestly, in a setting this grim, that kind of loyalty to ordinary humanity hits different. Anyway, back to their story.
And the Wolf King intended to claim the satisfaction of killing the man personally. But when the two legions finally breached the governor's throne room, it was Lion L. Johnson who struck the killing blow. Enraged at being denied his vengeance, Russ marched up to the lion and struck him across the jaw. What followed was a duel that lasted for a week or more, the two Primarchs battling each other with everything they had, while their legions watched in horrified fascination. Neither could gain a decisive advantage, though both inflicted wounds that would have killed lesser beings 100 times over. Finally, Russ stepped back from the fight and began to laugh, seeing at last how ridiculous their quarrel had become. The lion did not appreciate the humor. Taking Russ's laughter as mockery, he struck the Wolf King unconscious with a final blow and withdrew with his legion. What had been a matter of personal honor between Primarchs became an institutional rivalry between their legions, a competition that would endure for 10,000 years. The Space Wolves saw the Dark Angels' withdrawal as cowardice. The Dark Angels saw the Space Wolves' laughter as dishonor. Neither would ever fully forgive the other, though both would fight alongside each other when duty required it. The Night of the Wolf stands as another defining moment from this era, demonstrating both the Space Wolves' willingness to confront their own brothers and the limits of that confrontation. Whilst the Emperor had dispatched Russ to bring the World Eaters and their Primarch Angron into compliance with Imperial standards, the World Eaters had been implanting their warriors with the Butcher's Nails, devices that drove them into berserk fury, but also slowly destroyed their minds. The Emperor wished this practice stopped. Russ approached Angron with the subtlety of a glacier and the diplomacy of a sledgehammer. He demanded that Angron cease the implantations and submit to Imperial authority. Angron, never known for his even temper, refused with characteristic violence. The result was a battle between the two legions that left thousands dead on both sides. Neither Primarch could claim decisive victory, though Russ would later argue that he could have killed Angron but chose not to, recognizing that slaying a brother Primarch was not the same as disciplining him. The aftermath was inconclusive. The World Eaters did not stop using the Butcher's Nails, and Angron remained as unstable as ever. But the Night of the Wolf sent a message to the other legions, a reminder that the Space Wolves would act against even their own brothers if they believed the Emperor's will demanded it. This willingness to police their fellow Astartes would become tragically relevant when the Horus heresy erupted and fully half the legions fell to chaos. Throughout the Great Crusade, the Space Wolves accumulated a record of achievement that rivaled any legion. They brought hundreds of worlds into compliance, defeated enemies ranging from human rebels to alien empires, and earned battle honors enough to fill entire libraries. Yet they lost warriors too, for the enemies of humanity were many and formidable, and even Space Marines are not truly immortal. But they never lost their essential character, never forgot what they were or why they fought. By the end of the Great Crusade, the Space Wolves Legion numbered between 95,000 and 100,000 warriors, smaller than some legions, but still a formidable force. Their many campaigns had shaped them into veterans of every type of warfare imaginable. Their loyalty to the Emperor had been tested and proven 1,000 times over, and their Primarch, Leman Russ, stood among the most respected of the Emperor's sons, even if that respect was sometimes tinged with wariness. The seeds of the coming catastrophe were already planted, of course. Horus was turning against his father, thus corrupted by the powers of chaos. Magnus the Red was pursuing forbidden knowledge that would soon lead to disaster. The galaxy was about to burn, but as the Great Crusade reached its height, the Space Wolves stood ready to face whatever challenges might come. They had proven their loyalty through deed after deed. They would soon be called upon to prove it again, in circumstances more terrible than anything they had yet faced. The burning of Prospero, loyalty's terrible cost. There are events in history that cast long shadows. moments when the course of the future is irrevocably altered by choices made and actions taken. For the Space Wolves, no event casts a longer shadow than the burning of Prospero, at the destruction of the Thousand Suns homeworld that transformed a rivalry between brother legions into a hatred that would endure for 10,000 years. It is a story of loyalty and betrayal, of good intentions leading to catastrophic outcomes, and of the terrible price that warriors sometimes pay for following orders. The Council of Nicaea had banned the use of psychic powers by the Space Marine legions, a ruling that fell particularly hard on the Thousand Suns, whose entire identity was built around the mastery of psychic arts. Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Suns, had argued passionately against this ban, but the Emperor had ruled against him. The Thousand Suns were ordered to cease their practices and return to more conventional methods of warfare. They did not fully comply. Magnus continued his researches into the nature of the warp, convinced that his powers could be used for the benefit of the Imperium if only he could master them completely. And then, in the depths of his meditations, he saw something that changed everything. He witnessed a vision of the future, a vision of Horus Lupercal, the War Master himself, turning against the Emperor and plunging the Imperium into civil war. Desperate to warn his father of this approaching catastrophe, Magnus chose to use his forbidden powers to project a message directly to Terra. The spell worked too well. Magnus's psychic projection not only reached the Emperor, but also damaged the wards protecting a secret project hidden beneath the Imperial Palace, a project that represented the Emperor's greatest hope for humanity's future. The Emperor was furious. Magnus had disobeyed direct orders, and in doing so, had set back work that could not easily be repaired. The Emperor sent a message to Lim and Russ. Bring Magnus back to Terra to answer for his crimes. What happened next remains shrouded in deliberate obfuscation and the manipulation of the ruinous powers. The original order was to apprehend Magnus, not to destroy him or his legion. But Horus, already secretly turned to chaos, intercepted the order before it reached Russ. The War Master altered the Emperor's instructions, transforming a mission of retrieval into an order of extermination. The Space Wolves, Horus suggested, should treat the Thousand Suns as they would treat any other enemy of the Imperium. Russ received these falsified orders and struggled with them. Despite his long-standing distrust of Magnus and his hatred of sorcery, the Wolf King was not eager to murder a brother Primarch and destroy a brother legion. He made one final attempt to resolve the situation peacefully, sending a message to Magnus through a psychic channel, offering the Thousand Suns a chance to surrender. The message was never received. The chaos powers that had manipulated Horus now manipulated this final communication, ensuring that Magnus believed no warning had been given, that the Space Wolves had come only for blood. What followed was a massacre. The Space Wolves descended upon Prospero with all the fury they could muster, their fleet joined by elements of the Custodian Guard, the Sisters of Silence, and even forces of the Sons of Horus. The planet's defenses were overwhelmed in short order, and the wolves made planetfall amidst the ruins of a world that had been beautiful before their arrival. The fighting was savage beyond description. The Thousand Suns, for all their mastery of the arcane, were caught off guard by the ferocity of the assault. Their psychic powers, which should have given them tremendous advantages in battle, were partially neutralized by the presence of the Sisters of Silence, whose blank minds created zones of psychic null, and the Space Wolves fought with the fury of warriors who believed they were executing the Emperor's judgment upon traitors and oath-breakers. Magnus himself had decided not to resist. He had seen in his visions the consequences of his actions, had understood that he had inadvertently played into the hands of the very enemies he had tried to warn against. In a state of cosmic despair, as the Crimson King had ordered his legion not to fight back, to accept the destruction that was coming as penance for his mistakes. But his sons refused to die without a struggle. Led by Chief Librarian Azek Ahriman, the Thousand Suns fought back against the invaders, determined to survive, even if their Primarch would not. Russ and Magnus finally met in single combat, amidst the burning ruins of Tizca, the jewel city of Prospero. The battle between the two Primarchs was titanic, each wielding power beyond mortal comprehension. But Russ fought to kill, while Magnus fought without true commitment, his heart already broken by his own failures. In the end, Russ struck a blow that broke Magnus's spine, a wound that would have killed any lesser being. But Magnus did not die. In the moment of his defeat, and he made a final bargain with the Chaos God Tzeentch, accepting damnation in exchange for the survival of himself and his legion. A portal opened in the fabric of reality, and Magnus fled with the remnants of his sons to the planet of the sorcerers within the Eye of Terror. What had been a loyal Space Marine legion became a warband of Chaos Marines, their hatred of the Space Wolves burning as hot as the fires that had consumed their homeworld. For the Space Wolves, the burning of Prospero was a victory that felt like defeat. They had carried out their orders, had punished what they believed to be treachery and heresy, but they had also driven a brother legion into the arms of the enemy, the 13th Great Company, tasked with pursuing the fleeing Thousand Sons into the Eye of Terror. He vanished into that hellish realm and would not be seen again for 10,000 years. The enmity between Space Wolves and Thousand Sons, born in blood and fire on Prospero, would become one of the defining hatreds of the Long War. In later ages, when the full truth of Horus's manipulation became known, some wondered if the Space Wolves should have questioned their orders more carefully. But this overlooks the essential nature of the warriors involved. The Space Wolves were loyal to the Emperor, and they had received what they believed to be the Emperor's command. To question such an order, to second-guess the judgment of their lord and master, would have been to demonstrate the very disloyalty they were punishing in others. The tragedy of Prospero lies not in any failure of loyalty, but in the manipulation of that loyalty by evil powers. But the Space Wolves did exactly what loyal warriors were supposed to do. They followed orders, that those orders had been corrupted by chaos, that their very obedience had been used against them, makes the event more tragic, not less. The Space Wolves were victims of the burning of Prospero just as surely as the Thousand Sons, even if their wounds were less visible. And in the millennia since, the Space Wolves have borne the weight of what happened on Prospero without complaint. They do not apologize for carrying out what they believe to be the Emperor's will. They do not seek to excuse their actions based on Horus's manipulation. They accept that they destroyed Prospero and that Magnus the Red became their eternal enemy as a result. This too is a form of loyalty, the willingness to accept the consequences of serving one's lord, even when those consequences are terrible. Unwavering loyalty. During the Horus heresy, standing against the darkness. When Horus Lupercal turned against the Emperor and half the Space Marine legions fell with him, the galaxy descended into a nightmare of civil war. Brother fought brother across 1,000 worlds. Loyalties that had seemed unbreakable shattered like glass. The greatest warriors humanity had ever produced became its greatest enemies. In this time of ultimate testing, when every institution of the Imperium was strained to its breaking point, the Space Wolves proved what they had always claimed to be. They were loyal. Absolutely, unquestionably, without reservation, loyal. The Space Wolves were not present at Istvan V, where the treachery of Horus's rebellion was first revealed in all its horror. But they were not among the legions that died in the Dropsite massacre, cut down by brothers they had trusted with their lives. But when word of the betrayal reached Fenris, there was no debate about which side to take. The Space Wolves stood with the Emperor, as they had always stood with the Emperor, as they would always stand with the Emperor. The immediate aftermath of Prospero had left the Space Wolves damaged and scattered. Their pursuit of the Thousand Sons into the Eye of Terror had cost them the entire 13th Great Company. Their fleet had been ambushed by the Alpha Legion in the Alaxis Nebula, a trap that had come close to destroying Russ and his warriors entirely. They had been forced to fight a desperate holding action, bleeding ships and warriors they could ill afford to lose, until an unexpected relief force of Dark Angels arrived to break the siege. Yet even in these dire circumstances, the loyalty of the Space Wolves never wavered. Russ did not consider, even for a moment, accepting any of the offers of alliance that came from Horus's side. He did not weigh the advantages and disadvantages of joining the rebellion. Such calculations were meaningless to a warrior whose loyalty was not a matter of strategy, but of identity. The Space Wolves were the Emperor's executioners. They would die as the Emperor's executioners. There was nothing more to discuss. What distinguished the Space Wolves during the heresy was not merely that they remained loyal, for 8 other legions could claim the same, but the manner in which they expressed that loyalty. While Rogel Dawn fortified Terra and prepared for the inevitable siege, while Sanguinius and the Blood Angels fought desperately to slow Horus's advance, Russ conceived a plan that was either brilliantly audacious or foolishly reckless, depending on one's perspective. He would hunt down Horus personally and kill him. The logic behind this plan was simple, even if its execution would be anything but. Horus was the fulcrum of the rebellion. His charisma and strategic genius held the traitor legions together. If Horus could be slain, the rebellion might collapse into infighting and disarray, giving the loyalists time to regroup and counterattack. It was a high-risk strategy, but Russ had never been one to play it safe when a decisive blow seemed possible. Before launching his hunt, Russ returned to Fenris one final time. He sought the wisdom of his rune priests, hoping to gain some advantage through their connection to the spirit of Fenris. In a ritual that pushed even a Primarch to his limits, Russ journeyed into the Underverse, the realm of spirits that existed beneath the physical world. What he found there changed him, granting him insights into the nature of his enemy and the means by which Horus might be defeated. The confrontation between Russ and Horus took place aboard the Warmaster's flagship during the Battle of Trisolian. The 2 Primarchs, once close friends, now faced each other as mortal enemies. Russ was empowered by whatever he had learned in the Underverse, his weapons and armor enchanted by the spirits of Fenris. Horus was empowered by the Chaos Gods, their dark blessings making him more powerful than any mortal being should be. The battle was titanic, perhaps the greatest duel between Primarchs in the entire heresy. Russ fought with every ounce of skill and fury he possessed, but something held him back. Some accounts suggest he hesitated at the last moment, unable to strike the killing blow against a brother he still hoped to save. Others claim that Horus was simply too powerful, that even a Primarch could not stand against one who had been blessed by all 4 Chaos Gods. Whatever the truth, the result was defeat for Russ. Horus struck him down, inflicting wounds so grievous that only the Primarch's superhuman constitution kept him alive. The Space Wolves withdrew from the battle, carrying their fallen lord back to Fenris. The hunt had failed. Horus would continue his march toward Terra. And the final battle of the heresy would be fought without the Wolf King's direct participation. But even in failure, Russ had demonstrated the absolute nature of Space Wolf loyalty. He had been willing to risk everything, to put himself in mortal danger, to try to end the war with a single decisive stroke. That he had not succeeded did not diminish the attempt. While Russ recovered from his wounds, the siege of Terra began. Horus's forces surrounded the Imperial Palace, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance. The Space Wolves were too far away to participate directly in the siege, a fact that tormented Russ as he lay healing. He had wanted to be there when Horus finally fell. He had wanted to see the traitor punished for his crimes. Instead, he was forced to receive word of the battle's conclusion from messengers. The Emperor had confronted Horus aboard his flagship and slain him, but at a terrible cost. The Master of Mankind had been mortally wounded and was even now being interred upon the Golden Throne. His shattered body, kept alive by ancient technology, while his psychic might continued to protect humanity. Russ wept when he heard the news, tears of grief for his father and tears of rage that he had not been there to prevent this outcome. In the aftermath of the heresy, during the period known as the Scouring, the Space Wolves pursued the traitor legions with particular fury. They hunted the surviving sons of Horus across the galaxy, extracting vengeance for the damage done to the Imperium. They fought alongside the other loyalist legions in campaign after campaign, demonstrating through deeds that their loyalty had never wavered and never would. When Robut Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, proposed his Codex Astartes as a means of reorganizing the Space Marine legions into smaller, less threatening chapters. Russ was among those who opposed the plan most vehemently. He stood with Rogel Dawn of the Imperial Fists against what they saw as an insult to their legion's honor and effectiveness. Unlike Dawn, however, Russ eventually accepted a compromise. The Space Wolves would adopt some aspects of the Codex's organization while maintaining their unique traditions and chapter structure. The resulting arrangement left the Space Wolves as one of the largest and most idiosyncratic chapters in the Imperium. They maintained their great companies rather than adopting Codex-compliant battle companies. But they kept their unique rank structure and promotion system. They refused to create successor chapters using their gene seed, citing the instability of the Canis Helix. In essence, they remained what they had always been, the Space Wolves, loyal to the Imperium, but answerable primarily to their own traditions and values. Throughout this period of upheaval and reorganization, the loyalty of the Space Wolves remained constant. They argued with Guilliman about the Codex, but they did not rebel against his authority. They maintained their unique ways, but they continued to answer the Imperium's call to battle. They had proven their loyalty during the heresy, and they would continue to prove it through all the long millennia that followed. The scouring that followed the Siege of Terror saw the Space Wolves at the forefront of the hunt for traitor forces. They pursued the remnants of the traitor legions across the galaxy, showing no mercy to those who had betrayed the Emperor. Their vengeance was terrible, but also purposeful, aimed at preventing the traitors from regrouping and launching another assault on the Imperium. Every battle they fought was a reaffirmation of their loyalty, a statement written in blood that the Space Wolves would never forget what had been done during the heresy. During this period, Russ underwent a profound change. The Primarch, who had always been so confident, so certain of his purpose, began to question the choices he had made. He reflected on the burning of Prospero and wondered if there had been another way. And he thought about his failure to defeat Horus and the consequences that had followed. The weight of these doubts wore on him, adding to the burden he already carried. The feast at which Russ announced his departure remains one of the most mysterious events in Space Wolf history. The Primarch stood before his assembled warriors and declared that he was dying, that he must leave to seek something that would determine the fate of his chapter, and perhaps the Imperium itself. He gave no explanation of what he sought or where he would find it. He simply left, taking his closest retainers with him, and leaving only Bjorn behind to lead the chapter in his absence. What Russ sought remains unknown to this day. Some believe he went in search of the Tree of Life, a legendary artifact said to be able to heal even the Emperor himself. Others think he was hunting for a way to cure the curse of the Wolfen that afflicted his gene seed. Still others believe he foresaw some future threat that only he could address, and went to prepare for a battle that has not yet come. Whatever the truth, Russ promised to return at the Wolf Time, the prophesied final battle, and his sons have awaited that return ever since. The Canis Helix and the curse of the Wolfen, the beast. Within every Space Marine chapter carries within its gene seed the legacy of its Primarch, the genetic inheritance that transforms mortal men into superhuman warriors. But the gene seed of the Space Wolves is different from all others, touched by something that makes the sons of Russ unique among the Adeptus Astartes. They call it the Canis Helix, the spirit of the wolf, and it is both their greatest strength and their most terrible weakness. The Canis Helix is a mutation of the standard gene seed pattern, a deviation from the Emperor's original design that some believe was intentional, and others attribute to the influence of Fenris itself. It grants the Space Wolves enhanced senses beyond even those of other Space Marines, allowing them to track prey by scent alone, to hear sounds that would be inaudible to ordinary Astartes, to see in conditions that would blind their cousins. Their canine teeth grow longer and sharper than those of other Space Marines, capable of piercing plasteel. Their skin becomes tough and leathery, resistant to damage. Their instincts become sharper, more primal. connecting them to the predatory heritage of their primarch. While these enhancements make the Space Wolves formidable hunters, capable of tracking enemies across any terrain and fighting with a ferocity that borders on the feral. In close combat, a Space Wolf is a terrifying opponent, combining superhuman strength and speed with the savage instincts of a predator. Many enemies have learned to their cost that fighting a Space Wolf is not like fighting other Astartes. It is like fighting a wolf itself, cunning and relentless, and utterly without mercy. But the Canis Helix carries a terrible risk. The same genetic quirks that enhance a Space Wolf's combat abilities also threaten to overwhelm his humanity entirely. The beast within, as the wolves call it, lurks in every son of Russ, waiting for a moment of weakness to emerge and claim control. When this happens, the afflicted warrior transforms into something known as a wolfen, a creature more beast than man, driven by animal instincts and capable only of the most basic thought. The transformation begins during the initial implantation of the Canis Helix, when aspirants drink from the cup of wolfen and absorb the genetic material that will begin their metamorphosis. The experience is agonizing. Bones crack and reform. Thick hair sprouts across the body. The aspirant's mind is overwhelmed by primal urges, the desire to hunt and kill and feed. This is the test of Morkai, and it is the most dangerous moment in a Space Wolf's creation. The aspirant must fight his way back to the Fang through the harsh Fenrisian wilderness, battling not only the deadly environment and its predators, but also the beast within himself. He must maintain his sanity, his sense of self, even as every instinct screams at him to surrender to the animal. Those who fail become true wolfen, lost to the wilderness, their humanity consumed by the beast. Those who succeed return to the Fang to receive the remaining gene seed implants that will stabilize the transformation and complete their metamorphosis into Space Wolves. But the danger does not end with successful initiation. The curse of the wolfen follows every son of Russ throughout his life, waiting for moments of extreme stress or emotion to reassert itself. In the heat of battle, when the blood runs hot and the killing fury rises, even veteran Space Wolves can feel the beast stirring within them. The wolf priests watch their brothers constantly, ready to intervene if a warrior shows signs of losing control. Yes, sometimes they succeed in pulling a brother back from the edge. Sometimes they do not. The existence of the wolfen has been a closely guarded secret of the Space Wolves for most of their history. The wider Imperium, already suspicious of the wolves' unorthodox ways, would likely view the cursed creatures as evidence of corruption or mutation requiring purging. The Space Wolves have therefore concealed the truth about the wolfen, hiding their afflicted brothers in the depths of the Fang or releasing them into the Fenrisian wilderness, rather than allowing outsiders to learn of their existence. The instability of the Canis Helix also explains why the Space Wolves have only one successor chapter, and even that experiment ended in disaster. The Wolf Brothers, created during the Second Founding, it quickly succumbed to the curse of the wolfen on a massive scale. Without the unique environment of Fenris and the careful oversight of the wolf priests, the warriors of the Wolf Brothers found themselves unable to control the beast within. The chapter scattered and eventually was declared lost, leaving the Space Wolves as the sole inheritors of Leman Russ's genetic legacy. The 13th Great Company, lost in pursuit of the Thousand Suns during the burning of Prospero, represents another dark chapter in the story of the wolfen. These warriors entered the Eye of Terror and were exposed to the corrupting influence of the warp for 10,000 years. They did not fall to chaos, their loyalty to the Emperor proving stronger than even the whispers of the dark gods. But the prolonged exposure accelerated the effects of the Canis Helix, and many of them became wolfen, creatures of nightmare who nonetheless continued to hunt the enemies of mankind. When the 13th Company finally returned to the Imperium in late Millennium 41, they brought their wolfen with them. The reaction within the Space Wolves was mixed. Some saw the wolfen as honored brothers who had maintained their loyalty despite terrible trials. Others viewed them as dangerous monsters who threatened to expose the chapter's darkest secret to the wider Imperium. The debate over what to do with the returning Wolfen nearly tore the chapter apart. In the end, Logan Grimnar decided to bring the Wolfen home to Fenris to attempt to restore their humanity through the rituals and ministrations of the wolf priests. This decision would have far-reaching consequences, and drawing the attention of the chapter's ancient enemies and leading to events that would shake the Space Wolves to their very foundations. But it was a decision made from loyalty, the unwillingness to abandon brothers who had served faithfully for 10 millennia, regardless of what they had become. The curse of the Wolfen is not merely a genetic defect or an inconvenient side effect of the Space Wolves' enhancement process. It is a constant reminder of what lies beneath the surface of every son of Russ, the beast that must be controlled but can never be fully eliminated. The Space Wolves live with this burden every day of their lives, knowing that they are one moment of weakness away from becoming something monstrous. But that they maintain their humanity despite this constant threat is a testament to their strength of will and their commitment to remaining worthy of the legacy they carry. In a sense, the battle against the beast within is the truest expression of Space Wolf loyalty. It would be easy to surrender to the animal, to embrace the power and freedom that comes with abandoning human concerns. But the Space Wolves do not take the easy path. They fight the beast every day, maintaining their humanity through conscious effort and deliberate choice. They remain human, and thus remain capable of the loyalty that defines them, because they refuse to become anything else. Champions and heroes, Bjorn, Grimnar, and the warriors, who define a chapter. Every Space Marine chapter venerates its heroes. They are the warriors whose deeds have shaped the chapter's identity and provided examples for future generations to follow. But the Space Wolves' veneration goes beyond mere respect. They tell sagas of their heroes, epic poems passed down through the centuries, keeping the memory of the fallen alive in a way that is deeply personal and profoundly Fenrisian. To understand the Space Wolves' loyalty, one must understand the warriors who have embodied that loyalty most perfectly. Bjorn the Fell-Handed stands alone among the heroes of the Imperium. He is the oldest living Space Marine, a warrior who fought beside the Emperor himself during the Great Crusade, who served in Leman Russ's personal retinue during the Horus Heresy, who has witnessed 10,000 years of history from within the armored shell of a dreadnought. But when the Space Wolves speak of their past, Bjorn is the living link to everything they have been. In his mortal life, Bjorn was a member of Russ's Wolf Guard, one of the Primarch's most trusted warriors. He earned the name Fell-Handed during the burning of Prospero, when he lost his left arm to the machinations of chaos. Rather than accept an augmetic replacement, he stole a wolf claw and used it as both weapon and prosthetic, a choice that demonstrated the stubborn independence that would characterize him for all the ages to come. When Russ departed on his final journey, leaving Fenris for reasons he shared with no one, the Primarch left Bjorn behind. Of all his wolf guard, only Bjorn was not invited to accompany his lord into the unknown. This exclusion was deliberate. Bjorn was chosen to stay because Russ knew he was the strongest, as the one most capable of leading the chapter through the dark times ahead. Bjorn became the first Great Wolf, establishing the precedent that all future chapter masters would follow. His interment in a dreadnought came after he suffered mortal wounds in battle, wounds too severe for even a Primarch's son to survive unaided. The Iron Priests entombed him in a sarcophagus of adamantium and ceramite, preserving his life force within a walking engine of war. For 10,000 years, Bjorn has slept in the depths of the Fang, awakened only when the chapter faces threats too great for ordinary warriors to handle. When Bjorn speaks, the Space Wolves listen with reverence, bordering on worship. He is the only living being who knew Leman Russ personally, who can speak of the Primarch not as a legendary figure, but as a lord and friend. His memories of the Great Crusade, of the heresy, of the founding of the chapter as it exists today, are treasures beyond price. Every 1,000 years, during the feast of the Emperor's Ascension, Bjorn is awakened to tell his stories, and space wolves travel from across the galaxy to hear him speak. But Bjorn is more than a living repository of history. When roused to battle, he is a force of destruction that few enemies can withstand. His massive power fist, enhanced with a wolf claw in honor of his mortal days, crushes everything it touches. His assault cannon speaks with the voice of the Emperor's wrath, scything down enemies by the dozens. And his presence on the battlefield inspires the space wolves around him to feats of valor that would seem impossible under normal circumstances. Logan Grimnar, the current Great Wolf, represents a different kind of heroism. Where Bjorn is a link to the ancient past, Grimnar is a leader for the present, a warrior whose centuries of service have made him one of the most respected figures in the Imperium. He has led the Space Wolves for over 500 years, longer than any great wolf since Bjorn himself, and his deeds have added countless verses to the sagas of his chapter. Born on Fenris to the Iron Blood tribe, Grimnar survived the brutal testing process that weeds out all but the strongest aspirants. His transformation into a space wolf was marked by extraordinary events. During the trial of Morkai, he slew the ice troll Frostblood, a creature that had killed dozens of aspirants before him. He did not merely survive his transformation, he triumphed over it, as demonstrating from the very beginning that he was destined for greatness. His rise through the ranks was swift but earned. Grimnar proved himself in battle after battle, demonstrating not only personal combat prowess, but also the qualities of leadership that would eventually make him Great Wolf. He has a natural charisma that draws other warriors to him, an easy manner that makes even veteran Longfangs warm to his presence. When Grimnar speaks, others listen. When Grimnar leads, others follow. The First War for Armageddon represented a defining moment in Grimnar's career. When the demon Primarch Angron led a massive chaos invasion of the Hive world, it was Grimnar who organized the defense and held the line until reinforcements could arrive. He coordinated Space Wolves, Grey Knights, and Imperial Guard forces into an effective fighting force, demonstrating tactical acumen that rivaled any commander in the Imperium. And when the battle was won, it was Grimnar who stood against the Inquisition's plans to purge the surviving defenders. This brings us to one of the most controversial aspects of Grimnar's legend. After the First War for Armageddon, the Inquisition ordered that all mortal survivors of the battle be killed or sterilized to prevent any taint of chaos from spreading. Grimnar, who had fought beside these brave men and women, refused to accept this judgment. He shielded the survivors with his own fleet, defied the Inquisition's orders, and eventually killed Grandmaster Joros of the Grey Knights. When the Inquisitor Lord Kisnaros pushed the conflict to its breaking point, the resulting conflict, known as the Months of Shame, saw Space Wolves fighting against Grey Knights and Inquisition forces across multiple star systems. It was a dark chapter in the history of both organizations, but it demonstrated something essential about Grimnar and the chapter he leads. The Space Wolves are not loyal to abstract institutions or political structures. They are loyal to the people they are sworn to protect. When those people were threatened by the very institutions that should have been protecting them, Grimnar stood against those institutions without hesitation. Other heroes have shaped the Space Wolves across the millennia. Ragnar Blackmane, the youngest Wolf Lord in the chapter's history, whose recovery of the Spear of Russ earned him legendary status. Ulrich the Slayer, the oldest and most revered Wolf Priest, who has presided over the transformation of countless aspirants and whose wisdom guides the spiritual life of the chapter. Arjak Rockfist, the champion of Logan Grimnar's great company, whose massive thunderhammer has crushed the skulls of tyrants and monsters across 100 battlefields. Each of these warriors embodies the Space Wolf ideal in different ways, but all share certain common traits. They are fierce in battle, loyal to their brothers, and dedicated to the protection of humanity. They do not seek glory for its own sake, but earn it through deeds that serve the greater good. They are wolves, predators, who kill when killing is necessary, but who never lose sight of why they fight. or whom they serve. The sagas of these heroes are not merely entertainment or historical record. They are teaching tools, examples that younger space wolves are expected to study and emulate. When a Bloodclaw struggles with the beast within, he is reminded of how Bjorn mastered his own fury. When a Grey Hunter questions whether a particular order serves the chapter's true interests, he is pointed toward Grimnar's example of principled defiance. The heroes of the Space Wolves are not distant legends but present guides, their lives serving as maps for those who follow. This is perhaps the deepest expression of Space Wolf loyalty, the way each generation connects itself to those who came before. A Space Wolf does not fight merely for abstract principles or imperial mandates. He fights because Bjorn fought, because Grimnar fights, because Russ himself fought. While he is part of a chain of loyalty that stretches back to the founding of the Legion and forward to whatever future awaits. When he falls in battle, his name will be added to the sagas, and future generations will fight in his memory. Defying the Inquisition. The months of shame and true loyalty. There is a moment in the history of the Space Wolves that reveals more about their essential nature than perhaps any other. It is a moment when loyalty to the letter of imperial law conflicted with loyalty to the spirit of what the Imperium was supposed to represent. It is a story of defiance and consequence, of principled rebellion against authority that had overstepped its bounds. This is the tale of the months of shame, and it demonstrates why the Space Wolves' loyalty is of a different, deeper kind than mere obedience. Yet the first war for Armageddon had been a desperate struggle against the forces of chaos. The demon Primarch Angron, ascended to terrible power through the dark blessings of the Blood God, had led a massive invasion force against the vital hive world. The defenders had included the Armageddon Steel Legion, countless Imperial Guard regiments, a strike force of Grey Knights, and elements of the Space Wolves, under the command of Logan Grimnar. The battle had been apocalyptic in scale, with millions dying in the defense of humanity's holdings. In the end, the Imperium had prevailed. The Grey Knights had banished Angron back to the Warp, and the Chaos forces had been scattered and destroyed. But victory had come at a terrible cost, not just in lives lost, but in souls touched by the horror of what they had witnessed. Every survivor of the battle had seen demons walk the mortal realm. Every survivor carried memories of the impossible, of creatures that defied natural law and whispered promises of corruption. Standard inquisitorial protocol for such situations was clear and uncompromising. Those who had witnessed the demonic could not be trusted. Their memories might be contaminated by chaos influence. They might unknowingly carry taint that would spread to others. The only safe solution was containment and elimination. The civilians would be relocated to labor camps and sterilized. The surviving Imperial Guard would be destroyed in transit to their next deployment. The knowledge of what had happened on Armageddon would be erased. This is where the Space Wolves diverged from their brother Astartes, from the Inquisition, and from the established order of the Imperium itself. Logan Grimnar had fought beside the men and women of Armageddon. He had seen their courage, their sacrifice, their unwavering loyalty in the face of horrors that would have broken lesser souls. They were not pawns to be discarded. They were not potential threats to be eliminated. They were heroes who had earned the right to live, and Grimnar would not stand by while they were murdered. The confrontation began subtly. Grimnar's fleet remained in orbit over Armageddon, officially to provide support during the cleanup operations. In reality, the Space Wolves were watching, waiting to see what the Inquisition would do. When Lord Inquisitor Gesme Kisneros began implementing the Purge protocols, Grimnar moved to block him. What followed was a slow escalation from tense standoff to open conflict. Space Wolf ships interposed themselves between Grey Knight vessels and the troop transports carrying Armageddon survivors to their supposed new deployments. When the Inquisition attempted to fire on these transports, the Wolves blocked their shots, taking damage rather than allowing the murders to proceed. They did not fire back, not wanting to give the Inquisition an excuse to declare them renegades, but they made clear that they would not permit the slaughter of innocents. Cisneros was not accustomed to defiance. The authority of the Inquisition was supposed to be absolute, answerable only to the Emperor himself. That a Space Marine chapter would dare to obstruct inquisitorial business was unprecedented. That they would do so after a major chaos incursion, or when the threat of corruption was most acute, seemed like madness. The Lord Inquisitor attempted to negotiate, to reason with Grimnar, to explain the necessity of what he was doing. Grimnar listened to the arguments. He understood the logic behind them. He even acknowledged that the Inquisition had legitimate concerns about chaos contamination. But he could not accept that the solution to this concern was the murder of millions of loyal Imperial citizens. The people of Armageddon had stood against the demon. They had not flinched when hell itself had opened before them. They deserved better than execution by the very Imperium they had defended. The standoff continued for months, hence the name that history would give to this period. The Inquisition pursued the transports that had escaped from Armageddon, now destroying worlds and outposts that had come into contact with survivors. The Space Wolves attempted to protect as many as they could, but their resources were limited, and the Inquisition's reach was vast. Planets burned because of the Space Wolves' defiance, and the blood of millions was on both sides' hands. The final confrontation came when Cisneros brought his forces to Fenris itself, intending to force the Space Wolves to submit. The resulting battle saw Grey Knights fighting Space Wolves in the shadow of the Fang, a conflict that should have been unthinkable. When Cisneros attempted to negotiate a surrender under a flag of truce, then ordered his ships to fire on the Space Wolf fleet, Grimnar's patience finally snapped. He teleported aboard the Inquisition flagship with 20 Wolfguard Terminators, fought his way to the bridge, and confronted Cisneros directly. The Lord Inquisitor had Grandmaster Joros of the Grey Knights at his side, and for a moment it seemed that reasonable discussion might still prevent further bloodshed. But Cisneros had gone too far, betrayed too much trust, caused too much death. Grimnar's axe, the Morkai, took his head from his shoulders. What should have followed was disaster. The Space Wolves had killed an Inquisitor Lord and a Grand Master of the Grey Knights. They had defied Imperial authority at its highest levels. By all the laws of the Imperium, they should have been declared excommunicate traitores, hunted down and destroyed as renegades. But Bjorn the Fell-Handed, awakened for this crisis, as for so many before, negotiated a peace that allowed both sides to save face. The terms of the peace were remarkable, as no Inquisition ship would ever appear in the skies above Fenris again, on penalty of immediate destruction. The Space Wolves who had learned of the Grey Knight's existence would not be mind-wiped, as was standard protocol, but would instead be fully briefed on the Grey Knight's mission and importance. The surviving Armageddon defenders, who had been saved, would be allowed to live, relocated to distant worlds where they could start new lives. In the aftermath, the Grey Knights themselves named this period the Months of Shame. Not because they were ashamed of fighting against renegades, but because they recognized that they had been used as tools of oppression against loyal citizens of the Imperium. The Space Wolves had been right to resist. The Inquisition had been wrong to pursue such extreme measures. The entire ugly affair had been a failure of Imperial institutions to live up to their own principles. This is what Space Wolf loyalty looks like in practice. It is not blind obedience to authority. It is not mindless following of orders. It is loyalty to the ideals that the Imperium is supposed to represent. Loyalty to the people that the Astartes were created to protect. When those ideals and those people were threatened by the very institutions charged with safeguarding them, the Space Wolves chose principle over protocol. Grimnar has never apologized for what happened during the Months of Shame. He does not regret the deaths of Cisneros or Joros. He does not second-guess his decision to stand between the Inquisition and its intended victims. The people of Armageddon had fought with courage and honor. They deserve protection, and not extermination. That he had to fight against supposed allies to provide that protection does not make him disloyal. It makes him loyal to something deeper than organizational hierarchies. This is the essence of Space Wolf loyalty, the willingness to fight for what is right, even when doing so puts them at odds with the established order. They do not serve the Imperium as an abstract political entity. They serve humanity, the countless billions of ordinary people who depend on the Astartes for protection. When the Imperium fails those people, the Space Wolves will stand against the Imperium itself if necessary. This is not disloyalty. This is loyalty of the truest and deepest kind. The wolf time and the modern era, enduring through 10,000 years. 10,000 years. For 10,000 years, while the Space Wolves have stood watch over humanity, fighting battle after battle, war after war, enemy after enemy. They have seen empires rise and fall. They have witnessed horrors that would drive lesser warriors mad. They have lost brothers beyond counting, their names recorded in sagas that grow longer with each passing century. And through it all, they have remained loyal, never wavering, never faltering, never forgetting what they are and why they fight. The millennia since the Horus Heresy have not been kind to the Imperium. The Emperor remains on his golden throne, neither truly alive nor truly dead, his psychic might the only thing holding back the tides of chaos that would otherwise consume humanity. The Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that makes warp travel possible, flickers and wavers as the millennia grind on. Our alien empires press against the Imperium's borders. Internal corruption eats away at the foundations of human civilization, and the forces of chaos, defeated but never destroyed, continue their eternal war against everything humanity holds dear. The Space Wolves have faced all of these threats, and more. They have fought against every enemy of mankind, from the green tide of the orcs, to the hungry swarms of the Tyranids, from the ancient menace of the Necrons, to the eldritch horrors of chaos itself. Their sagas are filled with accounts of desperate last stands and miraculous victories, of enemies thought unstoppable brought low by the fury of Fenris. The return of the Wolfen in the closing years of the 41st millennium marked a turning point in the chapter's history. The 13th Great Company, unlost for 10,000 years in pursuit of the Thousand Suns, emerged from the Eye of Terror bearing both gifts and curses. Their loyalty had never wavered despite millennia of exposure to the corrupting influence of the warp. They had continued their hunt, continued their war, continued their service to the Emperor, even when no one in the Imperium knew they still existed. But the long exposure to chaos had accelerated the effects of the Canis Helix. Many of the 13th Company had become Wolfen, their humanity consumed by the beast within. They were still loyal, still fought against the enemies of mankind, but they were no longer fully Space Marine. Their return forced the Space Wolves to confront the darkest aspects of their genetic heritage in ways they had never done before. The decision to bring the Wolfen home to Fenris, and to attempt to restore their humanity rather than destroying them as monsters, demonstrated once again the depth of Space Wolf loyalty. These were brothers who had served faithfully for 10,000 years. They had maintained their oaths against impossible odds. That they had paid a terrible price for their loyalty did not diminish what they had achieved. The Space Wolves would not abandon them. Unfortunately, the return of the Wolfen drew the attention of the chapter's oldest enemy. Magnus the Red, now a demon prince of Tzeentch, had never forgotten or forgiven what happened on Prospero. When he learned that his ancient foes were gathering their cursed brothers, he saw an opportunity for revenge. The Daemon Primarch launched an invasion of the Fenris system itself, intent on destroying the Space Wolves once and for all. The siege of the Fenris system was one of the most desperate battles in the chapter's history. Thousand Suns Marines, backed by demonic hosts and traitor auxiliaries, struck at the heart of Space Wolf territory. Midgardia, one of the two habitable planets in the system besides Fenris itself, was completely destroyed. The world spirit of Fenris was nearly corrupted by Magnus's sorcery. Wolf Lord Eagle Iron Wolf fell in battle against the Crimson King. The chapter came closer to destruction than at any time since the Horus heresy. In the end, the Space Wolves prevailed, but only barely. Logan Grimnar struck a decisive blow against Magnus, wounding the demon Primarch so severely that Grey Knight purifiers were able to banish him back to the warp. The invasion was defeated, but at a cost that left the chapter weakened and struggling to maintain its strength. Fenris itself bore scars that might never fully heal. The arrival of Reboot Guilliman and the Indomitus Crusade brought both relief and concern. The Primarch of the Ultramarines had returned from death itself, leading a massive reinforcement effort that included the newly created Primaris Space Marines. These warriors, created using enhanced gene seed and additional implants developed over 10,000 years by Archmagos Belisarius Cawl, represented a new generation of Astartes, stronger and more resilient than their predecessors. Guilliman offered Primaris reinforcements to the depleted Space Wolves, warriors created from Leman Russ's genetic legacy who could replenish the chapter's losses. The offer was not entirely welcome. The Space Wolves had always been suspicious of outsiders, and these new warriors, created far from Fenris by a Mechanicum scientist, seemed more machine than wolf. Their very existence raised uncomfortable questions about the future of the chapter. Logan Grimnar, after consulting with his wolf lords and the ancient Bjorn, ultimately accepted the Primaris reinforcements. Practical necessity outweighed cultural concerns. The chapter needed warriors to replace its losses, and the Primaris were undeniably powerful. But Grimnar insisted that these new recruits undergo Fenrisian initiation rites, that they earn their place in the chapter through the same trials that had tested Space Wolves for millennia. The integration of the Primaris has been challenging, but ultimately successful. The new warriors have proven their worth in battle after battle, earning the respect of their more traditionally created brothers. They have also proven susceptible to the curse of the Wolfen, demonstrating that the Canis Helix remains dominant in Russ's gene seed, regardless of the additional enhancements. In this sense at least, they are truly sons of Russ, sharing the blessing and burden that defines the chapter. The galaxy in the current era is a darker and more dangerous place than it has been in living memory. The Great Rift, a massive warp storm that split the Imperium in half, has made travel and communication across the galaxy nearly impossible. Chaos incursions have increased dramatically. Alien threats press from all sides. The Imperium is beset on every front, and the Space Wolves are needed more than ever. Through it all, what the chapter endures. Logan Grimnar continues to lead with the same determination he has shown for 500 years. New heroes rise to fill the places of those who fall. The sagas grow longer, filled with new tales of valor and sacrifice. And the loyalty that has defined the Space Wolves since Leman Russ first took command of his legion remains unbroken. The prophecy of the Wolf Time speaks of a final battle, a confrontation at the end of days, when Leman Russ himself will return to lead his sons against the ultimate enemy. Whether this prophecy is literal truth or metaphor, it speaks to something essential about the Space Wolf character. They do not merely endure the darkness, they wait for the dawn. They maintain their loyalty, not just because it is expected of them, but because they believe that loyalty will ultimately be rewarded. That the war they fight has meaning, that the sacrifices they make serve a purpose greater than themselves. This is the legacy of 10,000 years. This is what it means to be a Space Wolf, to fight without ceasing, to remain loyal without wavering, to believe against all evidence that the light will eventually triumph over the darkness. In a galaxy of unending war, where hope itself can seem like a luxury, the Space Wolves keep faith. And that faith, expressed through every battle they fight and every oath they keep, is the truest expression of their loyalty. Conclusion. Why they are the most loyal legion. We have traveled far together, you and I, through 10,000 years of history and across a galaxy of conflict. We have walked the frozen wastes of Fenris and stood in the shadow of the Fang. And we have witnessed the deeds of Primarchs and the sacrifices of ordinary warriors. We have seen loyalty tested in fire and blood, and emerged with a deeper understanding of what that word truly means. Now, at the end of our journey, we must ask the question that has driven this entire exploration. Why are the Space Wolves the most loyal legion? The answer is not simple, though it might seem so at first glance. One could point to their record and note that they have never fallen to chaos, never betrayed their oaths, never wavered in their service to the Imperium. But this is also true of other loyalist chapters. One could cite their willingness to sacrifice themselves in battle, their courage in the face of impossible odds. But again, this is characteristic of all Astartes. To understand why the Space Wolves stand apart, we must look deeper. But the Space Wolves are loyal, not because they are ordered to be loyal. They are loyal because loyalty is built into the very fiber of their being, written into their gene seed and their culture and their souls. They learned loyalty as a Primarch learned it, running with wolves across the frozen wastes, understanding from their earliest moments that the pack survives only when every member is willing to fight and die for the others. This is not a lesson that can be unlearned, or a principle that can be abandoned. It is simply who they are. Consider how this differs from other forms of loyalty in the Imperium. Many servants of the Emperor are loyal out of fear, knowing that the consequences of betrayal are terrible. Others are loyal out of religious fervor, believing that the Emperor is a god and that service to him is sacred duty. Still others are loyal out of pragmatism, recognizing that the Imperium, for all its flaws, is better than the alternatives. These are all valid forms of loyalty, but they are all conditional in some way, dependent on external factors that might change. Space Wolf loyalty is unconditional. It does not depend on fear of punishment or hope of reward. It does not require religious belief or pragmatic calculation. It simply is. A Space Wolf is loyal the way a wolf is loyal to its pack, not because it has reasoned through the advantages and disadvantages of loyalty, but because loyalty is part of what makes a wolf a wolf. Remove that loyalty, and the creature that remains is something different, something lesser, something that has lost its essential nature. This is why the Space Wolves could stand against the Inquisition during the months of shame. Their loyalty was not to the political structures of the Imperium, but to the people those structures were supposed to protect. When those structures failed in their purpose, the Space Wolves did not fail with them. Their deeper loyalty, their pack loyalty, demanded that they protect the innocent, even at the cost of defying authority. This is why the Space Wolves never considered joining Horus, even for a moment. The War Master offered power and freedom from the Emperor's restrictions. He offered glory and conquest, and the fulfillment of every warrior's dreams. But none of these offers meant anything to warriors whose loyalty was not for sale, whose oaths were not negotiable, whose commitment to their lord could not be shaken by any promise or threat. This is why the Space Wolves maintain their unique traditions despite pressure to conform to the Codex Astartes. Their ways are not arbitrary customs to be discarded when convenient. Their ways are expressions of the loyalty that defines them, connections to their Primarch and their homeworld and the generations of warriors who came before. To abandon these traditions would be to weaken the very bonds that make their loyalty possible. The beast within every Space Wolf is, paradoxically, part of what makes their loyalty so powerful. They must constantly fight against the animal instincts that threaten to overwhelm their humanity. They must actively choose every day to remain human rather than surrendering to the beast. This conscious choice, this daily renewal of their commitment to humanity, keeps their loyalty fresh and vital in a way that more passive forms of dedication cannot match. Other chapters may claim to be more disciplined, more organized, more effective on the battlefield. These claims may even be true in some narrow technical sense. But discipline and organization and effectiveness are not the same as loyalty. They are means to an end, tools that can be wielded by loyal warriors and traitors alike. The Space Wolves offer something different, something rarer, something more precious. They offer loyalty itself, pure and uncompromised, tested by 10,000 years of war and proven stronger than any force that has tried to break it. The Imperium needs many things to survive. It needs soldiers and ships and weapons beyond counting. It needs administrators and tech priests and psychers. It needs the countless ordinary people who make civilization possible. But most of all, it needs warriors it can trust absolutely. Warriors who will never betray it. Warriors whose oaths mean something. The Space Wolves are such warriors. They have always been such warriors. They will always be such warriors. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods, where every institution is corrupt and every hope seems destined for disappointment, the Space Wolves offer something that might almost be called hope. They are proof that loyalty can endure. They are evidence that the bonds between warriors can withstand the test of millennia. They are living testimony that humanity, for all its flaws and failures, can produce souls that will not be broken. This is their legacy. This is their gift to the Imperium they serve. And this is why, when we speak of loyalty in the 41st millennium, we speak first and foremost of the Space Wolves. For Russ, for the Allfather, for the Pack, until the wolf time comes, and beyond. And that brings us to the end of our journey into the world of the Space Wolves. If you've enjoyed this exploration of one of Warhammer 40k's most iconic chapters, please consider leaving a like on this video. It helps more than you might think in spreading the word about the channel. And if you want to make sure you never miss another deep dive into the lore of the grimdark future, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. There are countless more stories to tell in this vast universe, with countless more heroes and villains, battles and betrayals, triumphs and tragedies. The Space Wolves are just one chapter in an endless saga of war and sacrifice. But they are a chapter worth knowing, worth understanding, worth remembering. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Until next time, may the Emperor protect you, and may the spirit of Fenris guide your path. The Sons of Russ stand watch eternal.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.